Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk here about a subject that is moving me very much recently. And I'd really like to get your feedback to a presentation that I'd call a discussion paper rather than a report. And so the question that's moving me is actually, could we create a society and economy that's kind of self-organizing? And the dream is quite old, as you know. So there's the fable of bees. And here it came up 300 years ago, this idea that actually society might be organized like a beehive. And of course Adam Smith is very well known for this concept of the invisible hand, who basically would arrange things in a wonderful way. If just everybody is doing the stuff that's best for himself or herself, altogether that would also kind of maximize the societal benefit. And here is a picture of this invisible hand, and sometimes it actually works well. Here is a movie that I made in Egypt, and you can see that sometimes without traffic lights.
But this is not real speed.
Even without traffic lights, traffic may flow very fluently. It's just a matter of design. It's a matter of design because what is happening here is that we have a unidirectional flow and another unidirectional flow on this side, and in between there is some buffer, a buffer that makes it possible for every participant to adapt to the gaps that are showing up in the traffic flow. Here is
how much is the
10
10 times normal speed?
Probably 10 times, yeah.
10 times.
I guess. Here's another example, pedestrian flows. And as you can see over here, there are lanes of uniform walking direction that are forming by self-organization. So it doesn't require a policeman, it doesn't require any laws to make it happen. This efficiency is a result of local interactions between pedestrians, and if you would ask them, they would not even be aware of this. So it's really a subconscious phenomenon. That's when the invisible hand really is at work, but unfortunately sometimes things go wrong, and I will argue that this happens when there are systemic instabilities. So when the density in the pedestrian crowd is too big, then a crowd disaster can happen, such as this was the case in Duisburg during the Love Parade disaster. So sometimes apparently the invisible hand is not there or it fails. And in fact there are other examples like the tragedies of the commons, such as environmental exploitation, environmental pollution, overfishing, or global warming, to mention just a few of them. Now I'd like to compare this with another example that will help you to understand what is going on here. So in these kind of situations, cooperation would be favorable for everybody, but it doesn't happen. Cooperation is kind of eroding, and finally the system ends up in a state of the tragedy of the commons, where cooperation doesn't happen, although it would be good if it happened. And what is behind is a business dilemma or another social dilemma. I don't think I need to explain it to you over here. In these kinds of dilemmas, cooperation is risky and defection is rewarding, and that kind of destabilizes cooperation in a very similar way as I will show that free traffic flow may not work out after some time and will break down, although that would be the desirable state. So when drivers have to go in a circle, this looks like a simple task and works for some time, but we'll see after some time that actually a small fluctuation in the flow will cause a breakdown of the traffic flow. Now we have a traffic jam. Traffic jam is moving backward, but as you can see, it stays in the system. We don't get rid of it anymore. So now if you would ask people, what has happened here? Why do we have a traffic jam? Then most people would probably say there was a stupid driver in front of me who didn't know how to drive a car. However, we know the mathematics of these kinds of phenomena, and we know that when the density exceeds a certain threshold, then small variations in the speed can be amplified, because the next driver will respond with a delay that has to be compensated by braking a little bit stronger, the next one even stronger. That causes altogether a cascade effect, and in the end people get stopped, although nobody wants this to happen. For me, this is a good example for systemic instability, which I'd like to define as a situation in which things will get out of control sooner or later, even if people have all the information that seems to be necessary, good technology, best intentions, and are trying hard to avoid loss of control. Coming back to social dilemma situations, we have simulated such a situation in a circle of interacting individuals or companies. Just assume that could be banks, for example. Blue corresponds to cooperative behavior, red corresponds to defective behavior, and then eventually we add, in a random way, shortcuts in the system which create additional links between those actors. And as you can see over here, as we increase the connection density in the beginning, we have an increase in the percentage of cooperation. And so we go on networking and network even more, but eventually we get into a situation where more connectivity is actually reducing the level of cooperation, and this erosion of cooperation happens, and we end up in this tragedy of the commons if everybody interacts with everybody else.
Which game
so
do you play?
This is a public goods game as far as I remember, or a business dilemma. Now this is interesting because we have seen this financial meltdown in 2008. Let's have a look at the data of Andy Helbing from the Bank of England. He has pointed out that the global financial network from 1985 to 1995, in 2005, has actually largely increased its connectivity. And so that very fact might have actually triggered this breakdown
What are the links?
that we've seen.
What are the links?
I think these are probably financial obligations between the banks. And here is the outcome. So Lehman Brothers defaulted in 2008, and then actually over time hundreds of other banks have defaulted, and that causes losses of hundreds of billions of dollars. So here again we have a cascade effect. This time it happens in a network setting, and this is real.
What is the relation between these three slides? The first one and the second and the third?
This,
No, this one and the next two.
I'm just saying that too much connectivity is actually undermining cooperation in these kinds of games that we're looking at here, and that the financial crisis might be a result of a breakdown of cooperation. That's what I'm suggesting here. There is no final proof for this, but there is food for thought, I would say. Now, the point is that we can't let these things happen. These are man-made disasters in some sense. And so the question is, how can we avoid these tragedies of the commons and other problems from happening? And so one attempt is to control the complexity of the systems. I mean, to force these complex systems to behave in a certain way. And I will argue that this is expensive and often also not very effective, as we can see, because otherwise we wouldn't have all those problems all over the world. But this approach basically goes back to the Leviathan, assuming that in order to create social or economic order, it requires a strong state. And that's why we come up with all sorts of regulations, hundreds of them every year. By now there are tens of thousands of laws and regulations that apply in the European Union, and probably nobody knows them all. Of course, these laws have to be enforced, and while this is pretty effective, in some cases, in others it's not, and after all, it's very expensive. So most industrialized nations actually have about 100% GDP per capita debts, and some of them even 200%. The question is, can we go on like this forever, or will we just not be able to pay for this anymore? And then the question arises, do we have to change things? And if yes, how can we change the system? So in these kind of situations, it's always good to have a quote by Albert Einstein, who said, we cannot solve our problems with the same kind of thinking that created them. But is there another option? That's the question. So I'd like to look now in my further presentation at three different ways of organizing complex systems. The first one corresponds to a centrally planned economy, so we have a central planner, and organization in the system happens in a top-down way, and also the regulation. We know that this happened in a number of countries, but it hasn't been very effective, and now we have here in many European countries market economy, where we have a bottom-up self-organization of the markets, but as we have seen, there are a number of problems that occur, such as the tragedies of the commons, or sometimes the market failures, and in order to avoid these things from happening, regulation steps in, politicians make laws, and basically set boundary conditions for the self-organization in a top-down way, more or less. And the concept is largely based on the Homo economicus, the self-regarding decision maker. This is applied both to individuals and companies. And I'd like to argue that there might be actually a third approach, which I'm going to call the participatory market society, where we wouldn't have just a bottom-up self-organization, but also a bottom-up self-regulation. But that requires a different kind of decision-making. It requires what I call a Homo Socialis, who takes decisions in a other regarding way. That means considering the impact on the environment and on other individuals. The Homo Socialis, as I'll show you later on, is assumed to be conditionally cooperative, takes self-determined decisions, and we'll see he can reach a better outcome than the Homo economicus because he is able to overcome tragedies of the commons. Now, so far it's just an assumption that this Homo Socialis could exist, and it's kind of maybe the kind of individual that sociology is dealing with and always has believed in its existence, while economists had kind of an incompatible view. And now, basically, the further talk is about how these two perspectives are growing together. Yes.
I challenge the fact that in the conventional market economy, the organization is bottom-up. I think with the globalization, it is top-down. And that is one of the big problems in the conventional market economy, that the organizations became so concentrated that you cannot speak about a bottom-up organization. So, and that makes the difference between the conventional market economy and the participatory market society even larger than you suggest now.
Okay, but in principle, this is now a theoretical classification. Say you may see some connections with real systems or not. Yes, and what is important here that we distinguish between self-organization and self-regulation. And as we go, that's a kind of a claim that I'd like to make. As we go from here to there are efficiency gains. And as we go from here to there are also efficiency gains. Why? Because at the moment we have this steady struggle between bottom-up market organization, what companies would like to do, and politics that tries to regulate it top-down, and this doesn't fit together, so it creates a lot of friction, in fact. And the question is, can we overcome that? Now, I'd like to show you that, in fact, the Homo Socialis does exist, and intentionally I'm going to make assumptions that I hope economists would accept. Because sociologists have always believed in the Homo Socialis, but economists haven't. Economists have believed in the self-regarding decision maker. And so we assume merciless forces of evolution. That means mutation and selection, as we do that in biology. It has always been argued that given these forces of evolution, nothing else could exist apart from a Homo economicus, a self-regarding decision maker, because if you start to be friendly to others, you may lose some payoff, and that reduces your reproductional fitness, and that means this kind of friendly behavior should disappear. That was kind of the implicit argument. Now, let's do the simulation, okay? And what we can see here is that actually under certain conditions, I'll come back to this later on, after some time, when starting with a Homo economicus, we find the evolution of a Homo Socialis. And also, interestingly enough, the Homo Socialis gets a higher payoff. So it's more successful than Homo economicus, and the reason for this is actually that the Homo Socialis here can overcome the tragedy of the commons. I mean, he can develop cooperation in a setting where the Homo economicus would always defect.
But is it by group selection?
Not exactly. I will now show you the assumptions behind the model. And some people may interpret it as group selection, but I think it's actually more tricky than that. So we have made assumptions, each of which wouldn't make the Homo Socialis likely to occur. First assumption is agents decide according to a best response rule. That means you take the decision that optimizes your utility given the kind of behavior your neighbors have shown in the past round. So, strict utility maximization given the behavior of the interaction partners. Then, how do we define the utility function? It considers not only the own payoff, but gives a certain weight to the payoff of their interaction partners. However, this weight is set to 0 for everyone at the beginning of the simulation. I mean, everybody is unfriendly, everybody is a Homo economicus in the beginning. Now, friendliness is a trait that is inherited to offspring. The likelihood to have an offspring increases exclusively with the own payoff, not the utility function. That means not considering friendliness. The payoff is assumed to be 0 when a friendly agent is exploited by all neighbors. That means if all neighbors defect, then you can't have offsprings as a cooperator. Then the fourth assumption is the inherited friendliness value tends to be that of the parent, but there's also a certain mutation rate, as evolution assumes. This mutation rate has been specified in a way that it wouldn't promote friendliness. So we don't have a random drift towards friendliness. And this is important because otherwise it wouldn't be a surprise. And in fact, as you've seen before, that creates the emergence of a Homo Socialis, an emergence that for the first people who happen to be friendly, because they have this genetic trait, say, will be really bad because everybody will just exploit them. And as a result, they will have no offspring. However, we have this conditional cooperativeness. And that means that the higher is my friendliness, the less people in my neighborhood would have to be cooperative in order to make me cooperative as well. And so in the beginning what happens is that people develop a certain friendliness but stay defective. And then one day, just by chance, somebody who is unconditionally cooperative is born and may be able to turn some neighbors into this cooperative mode because they're conditionally cooperative. That would trigger cascade effects of cooperation. Yeah? But it takes a number of generations for this to happen by chance.
Why does conditional cooperativeness come about? How to understand that?
Because mutation causes that people would not always have a zero friendliness.
Point
Yeah?
2. It's just a
Yes.
random.
I mean, the major problem is the behavior in large groups. And in the Olsen book, there's an argument that he says, assume that everybody is altruistic. But even then, in a large group, my altruism wouldn't change anything. So an alternative, I think, or maybe the question is how far that is compatible with the Austrian ideas.
Yeah, this is an important point. A single individual here cannot change the social system. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
even a
you
large
need to
group,
have
yeah,
also a random coincidence in a certain small neighborhood,
Yeah.
so that there is a kind of a critical cluster of potentially cooperative people, potentially, and then one day something like a Jesus is born just randomly, who cooperates whatever happens, and can turn these conditionally cooperative people into cooperators.
But Olsen would say in a large groups there is no sense in cooperating. Even if I see that you cooperate, let's see in Germany to reduce pollution. There's a lot of pollution. So and I'm friendly and want to reduce pollution, and I see you reduce pollution. I would say you are crazy. Why do you do that? So
I come back to the pollution problem later on, okay? So far I'm still discussing the basic and then I come to the solution.
But did you also consider that randomly you unlimited uncooperative actors rise?
Well, your friendliness can go down, actually,
Yeah.
through mutations. Yeah, so there's no monotonic increase at all. In fact, in order for this cooperation to happen, you need to have a correlation between, on the one hand, your friendliness and your behavior. So correlations are important, and for this neighborhood interactions are important, and that's why the Homo Socialis is only born if offspring tend to be born and raised in the neighborhood. Yeah? If they're just
So
raised in a random
the-
place of the world, then the Homo economicus will result, like the red dots. Yeah?
So in your model, the Homo economicus means a bound on friendliness.
Right.
The friendliness cannot go in the negative domain. So there's a barrier at zero, and whenever something happens which is positive, it may evolve in that direction.
We haven't looked at negative friendliness. That would be possible as well, but in fact there is a bound which defines basically the separation between the Homo economicus and the Homo Socialis.
Yeah, I agree, but I was trying to say that I think this is the technical reason why this can happen. What you showed us, that your system is bounded at zero. So if there's a perturbation, which takes effect for whatever reason,
Yeah.
it pushes it in the positive
No,
direction.
I don't think that considering negative weights would actually change the result much. That is interesting to look at. You know, I cannot guarantee it, but according to kind of experience of other systems I've experimented with, I don't think that will just make this effect disappear.
Is there a local interaction structure? Is there a
Local,
lattice?
yes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Does the
Yeah, the
dimensionality
neighbors.
of the lattice with the matter?
All neighbors, I think.
Yes.
Is it a two-dimensional torus?
In this case, it's a two-dimensional system, yeah. But it wouldn't have to be a two-dimensional one.
An economist should say, let's say we play a repeated PD here. So corruptive behavior is an equilibrium. We
No,
don't
we
need
don't
fragments.
have a shadow of the future here, yeah? We're
You-
not
you-
considering
You
that.
play until eternity in the evolutionary.
Yeah, but people are not forward-looking here, yeah? So it's not a shadow of the future effect here. Yeah? We can eliminate that in our model.
No, that is true. Vincent's argument is
If I'm just rational and forward-looking, let's say
you could
cooperative behavior.
produce a similar result by assuming selfish rationality and repeated interaction.
Yeah, but people are here in the simulation are not so intelligent that they say, okay, look, if everybody was friendly, then we would all have a much higher payoff, and then sit together and say, okay, let's be friendly. Of course, in principle, that would work. But here we don't assume this. Yeah, people have just local interaction, and they have this selection mechanism plus the mutation, and
But it
It's
would work for the
optimization
Homo
intelligence.
economicus as well.
Yeah, that is the
That is the point.
the what?
It works for the Homo economicus as well.
If there is feedback.
If it works.
If it works.
Yeah, but
So
I
the
still
point
think
is, you
that
know-
over time in the evolutionary model, I mean, you really have to take this time into account and the random mutations. And then in niches, perhaps in small local areas, something happens, as it happened with all life beings. Something happens that over long time spreads in further areas. So I understand that this is logically possible.
Right. This is the main point. So for the most of the parameter regime, all the red dots, you get the Homo economicus, as economists have always assumed. But under certain conditions, when offspring are born and raised close to their neighbors, then a Homo Socialis can emerge. And this is important. He can exist, and that's why we are social beings. In fact, you see over here a distribution of friendliness with time. So this is time. And you see in the beginning we assume everybody is unfriendly, but after some time there is a concentration around friendliness of around 0.4, say, maybe a little bit less. But we have a broad distribution actually of friendliness values. And let's have a look at what a colleague of mine, Ryan Murphy, has measured. He has in fact found that there are some people who behave like a Homo economicus, individualistic or self-regarding, but the majority of people tend to behave in a pro-social way. There are some people who have a negative friendliness, as was proposed before, but very few in fact. Yeah? So this is interesting, and now another question that people have asked is, would people just cooperate when belonging to the same family, sharing the same genes, say, the same trait, or not? So what we see over here is two families, yeah? And over time, by this mutation effect, you see sometimes people behave in a cooperative way, but then sometimes it disappears again, and eventually you have critical clusters. But the interesting point is that you would, after some time, find these mixed cooperative clusters where people with different family traits would eventually cooperate.
Yeah, I don't understand. Why, I mean, among your two group or two family model, why don't they start cooperating immediately? Because it's already a high trust situation.
No, there is no trust assumed in this.
Yeah, but sociologically there is.
Yeah, okay, but this is a nice point about multi-agent simulation. You can basically neglect whatever factors might complicate your interpretation of results, and so we're excluding them here. Although, of course, you're completely right that in reality it matters. But then the next question would be, how would trust evolve? That would be another simulation that would also be very interesting. I'll come back at least to reputation.
Why do you call it family?
Because we assume, again, by means of the simulation setup, that the red ones are all related, they have the same trait, and the orange ones are all related, they have the same trait. Yeah? And then things evolve, people have offsprings, and with a certain probability, offsprings would be not in the immediate neighborhood. That's why things get more mixed over here. Yeah. Now, in fact, already almost 300 years ago, Adam Smith was aware that humans were social beings. See what he's writing in the Theory of Moral Sentiments. However selfish man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others and render the happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it. I don't find that in the concept of the classical Homo economicus, and I think it would really be good to consider this wisdom in the theories of economics. So for that reason, I'm suggesting that we should have a new branch of economics. It's not entirely new. Yeah? I'm aware of this. Of course, there is a lot of economics that's also looking at other regarding behavior and social behavior, but as compared to the classical Homo economicus, it's a small body of literature. So these are probably thousands of books, or tens of thousands even, about the Homo economicus and self-regarding behavior, and a lot of theorems derived from this. While I'd like to say that we should have also thousands or tens of thousands of books on this Homo Socialis with the other regarding behavior, and that this is actually a theory that will become more and more important as people take decisions in a more and more networked way, as I will argue later on, through the emergence of social media and the use of those. We are becoming more and more networked decision makers, what I call networked mind, and that requires a new theory in economics, like economics 2.0, or I also call that socionomics. Now the interesting point is, you're not just making gifts to others and become poorer through this, but is actually superior to the self-regarding Homo economicus because tragedies of the commons are avoided. Now I'd like to look now at another example to get a better feeling for the different ways of organization that I have discussed before.
I would like to come back to Vincent's point. Yeah. Could you go back one or two slides?
Can we do that in the end, vielleicht? Perhaps? Yeah? So, three ways of organizing complex systems. And again, we assume a top-down regulation. That's kind of what we have today, a central traffic control authority that's collecting a lot of data from all over the city, and then it's trying to take the best possible decisions for everybody and impose that on the system. We could call that the benevolent dictator. Then we're looking at another way of organizing the traffic system, which is bottom-up self-organization, assuming a Homo economicus approach where every single intersection is trying to minimize waiting times of all the cars that are approaching. That's not very difficult. And third, we look at a bottom-up self-regulation, assuming a principle of a Homo Socialis, that means other regarding decision-making here. Those intersections are also trying to minimize travel times, but they're also taking care that queues that are forming are not growing too large, thereby having an impact on neighboring intersections. So this is other regarding. And why is it interesting to look at this example? Because here There's also a competition for scarce resources. In this case, it's time, yeah, or service. You cannot serve everybody at the same time. There's competition in the system. And from that point of view, there are quite some similarities with economic systems. Moreover, optimization of the system is a so-called NP-hard optimization problem. That means it cannot be done in real time, even with supercomputers. And as I will show you later on, that's actually the reason why other kinds of controls have a chance of competition. So what we see in this diagram is the queue length that results as a function of the capacity utilization of the intersection. And as you could expect, the queue length when we apply the top-down regulation is increasing as the capacity utilization is increasing. Let's have a look at this selfish optimization. That means each intersection, like a Homo economicus would do, strictly tries to minimize locally waiting times. And you see the queue lengths are much shorter, so it's performing more efficiently. We could say here, Adam Smith's invisible hand is working well. But on the other hand, we also see that before the maximum capacity is reached, queue lengths are exploding and coordination fails. It means Adam Smith's invisible hand fails in this area over here. Now, if we look at the other regarding optimization, the self-regulation, then we see that over the whole range of capacity utilization, we have the best performance.
Do
That's
you have a particular rule for the top-down regulation? I mean, if it would be over-optimum, wouldn't that have to be the smallest? I mean,
Now, the question is really, why can bottom-up self-regulation outsmart optimal top-down control? And the reason is that you cannot do the optimization in real time. That means what you have to do is you have to take data from the past to determine an average traffic pattern on Monday mornings or Tuesday afternoons or whatsoever. But the average traffic situation is unfortunately not representative for the actual traffic situation, because this is largely variable, and giving a largely variable situation that you cannot optimize in real time, flexible adaptation becomes superior to this systemic top-down.
It depends on variability of traffic patterns over time. If the traffic patterns over time would be very
stable, yeah, then it would be different. But the point is that as globalization progresses, many processes speed up and become less predictable and more variable. That means basically we will get into a situation where top-down regulation will be less and less effective, and we'll need more and more distributed control approaches.
So what's the sense, what's this idea of other regarding of what's the model of?
You're not looking just at your own situation, but you're also considering the situation of your neighbors that you're interacting with. And in this case, you're trying to avoid large queues. That could cause a spillover effect in this case. Yeah.
Do you have some information assumptions? I mean, to figure that out, I need to know something about the system. Or is it just local information?
Local information.
So it's like not blocking an intersection. Is this the behavioral pattern we are talking about? Not blocking an intersection in traffic, for example. This is
the other regarding tries to avoid spillover effects, and that's what makes it superior to the non.
But give an example. Why is not? I saw the slide before. Coordination. Coordination may be in pure self-interest. But why is coordination? Why is there Homo Socialis required?
Now the point
what are
is,
the other regarding preferences, and can you give an example?
cooperation would also be desirable in tragedies of the commons. Now, if we would all cooperate, it would be good for us, but the problem is that it's not a stable situation.
Yeah, but I mean, this
And here the other regarding decision making makes coordination or cooperation stable. That's the point. Not
That's
in a
my
coordination game, but this is not a coordination game here. It's more complicated than that. I think it's best to finish because there are a few more slides about these issues. So what I'm trying to conclude here is that decentralization allows one to manage and harness the increasing level of complexity and diversity of systems. That means as systems become more complex, top-down control is less and less viable, and for that very reason we need to have a more decentralized approach. And here you can see that it works very well. It creates these wonderful green waves. These green waves are efficient and they're inspired by local interaction principles as we find them in pedestrian flows at bottlenecks, where we see oscillatory flows even without a traffic light. So what we've done here, we have basically used this pressure principle that creates these oscillatory flows to define a traffic light control based on local interaction, right? And it works beautifully. Now the problem is, however, if we have the wrong institutional settings, and I think that anonymous exchange and homogeneous interaction, this is going to promote an erosion of cooperation, and as a result, even the Homo Socialis, that means the conditional cooperator, will behave like a Homo economicus. That means the way we have created certain kinds of markets basically doesn't allow a Homo Socialis to exist. So the question is, can we create institutions and markets that would support social decision making, other regarding decision making? And let's go back to the prisoner's dilemma. We know that there are a number of mechanisms that are actually turning a prisoner's dilemma into a different kind of game and thereby allow cooperation to happen. So, for example, direct reciprocity or indirect reciprocity or punishment is turning a prisoner's dilemma into a stackhand game, or kin selection is turning the prisoner's dilemma in a harmony game, and for reference I'd like to mention Martin Novak's work. So we know there are a number of mechanisms that in a social dilemma situation can turn the situation into a different kind of setting that allows cooperation to happen, such as genetic favoritism. The problem, however, is that it often comes with conflict between ethnical groups, so it's maybe not the best solution. Then direct reciprocity, but the problem is that it might further corruption. Then social norms. That's actually an interesting situation, because what we're looking here is a situation with 4 strategies: cooperation, defection, and then cooperators who punish defectors and defectors who punish defectors. Green are the cooperators who punish defectors. We call them moralists. And in that kind of situation, if everybody would interact with everybody else or with randomly selected interaction partners, after a short time the moralists are disappearing because they have punishment costs to pay, as compared to the cooperators who don't have to pay this punishment cost. And then we stay with cooperators and defectors, and we know that defectors are basically winning through. Okay? However, if we play the very same game, assuming neighborhood interaction, then we have a different kind of outcome, very surprisingly. So this is where the co-evolutionary effect between these different strategies matters. You can see that there is a segregation between the different strategies. So now the moralists don't have to compete directly with the cooperators, and that's why they can finally win through. For the same parameter values, where otherwise they would disappear in a homogeneous interaction setting. So that is a situation that allows us how second-order free riding disappears just by the consideration of spatial interaction or social network interaction. Now there's another way of stabilizing cooperation, which is by surveillance and enforcement, yeah, as the police would do it. But finally, given that we probably don't want to have a surveillance society, the question is there another way of stabilizing cooperation on a global scale? And I'd like to propose that reputation systems may be able to do the job and allow the Homo Socialis to thrive. In fact, reputation systems are quickly spreading all over the web these days, and therefore they're most likely good for something. In fact, it turns out, as work of Andreas Diegmann's team has actually confirmed, that buyers benefit from these kind of reputation systems because they can get a better service given they choose a seller with a higher reputation. But also the seller has an advantage because he can sell the same product for a higher price. That is, reputation systems introduce feedback loops that support good behavior. And now the question is, how would basically the institutions of the future look like in our society? You know, how could we design them in order to support the Homo Socialis, other regarding behavior, and overcome tragedies of the common? And I'm claiming that we need to change our way of thinking. We will need different kinds of institutions. And actually, I believe that all our institutions will change dramatically within the next 20 years. And the reason is that we have Moore's law for more than 100 years now, which says that computational power is exponentially growing. Within 18 months, computer power is doubling. It's even super exponential, as this graph is suggesting. And the implication is that within, say, 10, 15 years from now, computers will reach and exceed the capacity of a human brain. And that means, I mean, that was shocking to me when I saw that diagram for the first time, but there are more and more people who are pointing out to this problem. We are in the middle of a new technological revolution, the second, say, technological revolution, that will change our society and economy perhaps more than the invention of the steam engine. So computers will do many jobs that humans have done in the past. In fact, you know that IBM's Deep Blue was beating the best chess player in the world. Now we have IBM Watson. He was actually winning a game show where you need to have a lot of knowledge. And Watson was just connected to the internet, and as you can see, he was out winning the others really by a large amount. And now I'd like to mention...
Whose brains Bram Stoker? Oh.
This is one of the questions I would ask, but anyway. The point is now IBM Watson is used actually for hotlines, telephone hotlines. If you have a complaint about your washing machine or your computer and need to configure it and don't know how it doesn't work, Watson is doing a better job than humans who would give telephone hotline advice in the past.
But he has access to Wikipedia.
Yeah, but humans also have access.
But not in the quiz show.
Yeah, but as I'm telling you, we're getting to the point where machines will do a lot of the work that we have done in the past. In fact, 70% of financial trades are now done by computers, and Google cars are just around the corner. So this is going to change our society. Not necessarily to the negative. So the question is, how can we use this development actually to create perhaps a better society? And in fact, there are a number of interesting developments that we should have a look at, such as this crowdsourcing, which Wikipedia has used and made it to one of the biggest successes of the history of the internet. So it's now probably the best and most up-to-date Wikipedia. And we're also seeing now eventually a change in production. We're calling this prosumers because prosumers are consumers who are not just consuming ready-made products, but also contributing to the production of those products. So we call this co-production or co-creation. And one of the technologies that's driving that forward is 3D printers that allow you to produce things at home that otherwise couldn't have been produced at home. Same thing with energy production. You can buy a solar panel or a gas turbine and produce energy for yourself and for your neighbors. So some people say that the 20th century was the century of the democratization of consumption, while the 21st century will be the century of the democratization of production. And these kind of technologies allow it to happen. And in fact, social media, and would argue even more next generation social media, are very much supporting this trend. So why is that? Because now everybody can set up a project. Yeah, you can say, I have an idea, I want to produce some music or some movie or my own fashion line or whatever comes to your mind, and say, okay, I'm going to lead this project, who is joining in? And then you ask your friends and colleagues, and some people will join in, and maybe even people you've known before through Amazon Mechanical Turk. You can see the social media landscape is really quickly developing, and it's basically enabling us to come up with your own kind of production. So what I'm kind of suggesting is that these companies that we had in the past, with a lot of inertia that existed for 150 years, say, will be complemented by other ways of production that I call projects, which are much more fluid and short-lived, where you just have an idea, pull together all the resources that you need, make it happen, and then go on to the next project. So people would be leading projects and participating in other projects, and the web would enable this. So another interesting question in this connection is, how would you have to set up decision-making processes such that you can create collective intelligence, in the sense that you don't have just the wisdom of crowd phenomenon, which is kind of a statistical averaging phenomenon, but that by the interaction of many people will get results that are more intelligent than every single individual. And I do believe that top-down decision-making, as well as majority decision-making, cannot do the job. We know, for example, that majority decision-making is very much narrowing down the variability of ideas. So one idea is being selected and implemented. This is very much different from the way nature works. In nature, you have a steady evolution of new species and new traits and all this locally, and good traits would spread and others would disappear. But you would have a large heterogeneity of solutions, a large diversity, in fact. We have made a study that has shown that this trend towards consensus actually tends to undermine the wisdom of crowds. And there's much evidence that diversity is extremely important for society. I imagine society sometimes a little bit like an ecosystem, which requires many different kinds of species. Yeah, we call that social differentiation. And in fact, innovation rate is kind of proportional to diversity. So we need to be careful to protect socio and economic diversity if we want to be able to adapt to a changing world. Diversity is very important. And so this is the issue, to learn how to bring together many different special skills to create something which is more than that. And I think that will create a trend from top-down control, as we still have it in many companies today, towards enabling things to happen. So just assume you own a company, and now, because of the economic situation, or for whatever reason, competition, you would have to set free 10% of your workers. So in the past you would have unemployed those people. But think about it. Couldn't you basically ask them, what kind of new products would you come up with, given the skills that you have and the technology that we have in our company? What kind of products would you create? Yeah? So if BMW, for example, would not just say we'll produce cars and nothing like cars, but say, okay, given the capabilities we have, what else could we do? And ask the workers not just to execute what they have been asked from the next top level, but basically to use their creativity, put it together to create something like a spin-off company. And so I'm concluding with another example, which is about going towards a more sustainable economy, in particular to overcoming is maybe too much, but slowing down climate change. I think the past years have shown that we cannot hope that top-down management would do the job for us. For many years did we have negotiations, and there were always a few countries that didn't agree. So as a result, not much has happened. And now, rather than 2 degrees centigrade, you will probably have a 4-degree increase in temperature, which will be disastrous for a number of countries, such as Singapore, for example. So the question is, wouldn't be there another approach that perhaps turns out to be more effective? A bottom-up approach. And how would it look like? Well, in fact, most people live in cities, and most cities produce most of the CO2. Now, in the past, we have tried to go about climate change in the following way. First, we have to make a global agreement. Then we have a regulation that needs to be enforced. Yeah? Enforced on the country level, but also on the individual level. So for us, it would mean that politicians would tell us, you shouldn't take the plane to go to your holiday destination, you shouldn't use your car, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And people don't want to hear this, obviously. Otherwise, things would have changed already. So couldn't we basically turn it into something positive? And I'd like to propose to orient at the success of sports. So assume that we would have something like a climate competition, and the competition would be between cities. Cities like Zürich, and I guess also San Francisco, Los Angeles, London, I believe as well. Singapore is probably also joining the club. Are trying to get towards a more energy saving and less CO2 producing state. So we call this 2000 watt society in the case of Zurich. So if they basically create an alliance, and cities would turn into the agents of change, and more cities would basically join, and we would use the spirit of competition between the cities to drive forward technological innovation, but also the implementation of these technologies by the citizens. So we say, okay, let's see in what city people would buy most solar panels or whatever is considered to be a progress over previous technology. That would probably create a spirit, a drive, a competitive kind of attitude that would potentially change the situation that we're in at the moment. So from that point of view, I'd like to encourage everybody to think about alternative ways of going about all problems. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Dirk, you covered a lot of ground. I would like to look at some things in a little bit more detail. Could you go back to your slide with economics 1.0 and 2.0?
This one?
Yeah. So this was the conclusion of your story about, say, how cooperation is important.
It's kind of, I'd like to say the following. I'm of course aware that there are different variants of rational choice here. Yeah.
My question is the following. I mean, what we label economics 1.0, I mean, in a sense, to make the Homo economicus more stupid than he is. Because what you took out of the Homo economicus was precisely farsightedness. Now that was Vincent's point. If you include what is the standard definition of the Homo economicus, that he is farsighted, yeah, then you could get many of your results on cooperation and social dilemmas and so forth, you could get it with the Homo economicus too. So you wouldn't need what you label the Homo Socialis.
Well, I'd like to challenge this because in many situations farsightedness doesn't work. It requires prediction of the outcome of the interaction. And in fact, we know that in complex systems there are phenomena such as chaos or turbulence, and that makes by principle prediction beyond a certain time horizon impossible. That means that creates short-sightedness, kind of as a result of the complex interactions in the system. And so the assumption of farsightedness is not justified in many of the systems that I'm interested in. The traffic system was such an example where you have a large variability in the percentage of cars that would turn right, from one green phase to the next. That is changing a lot, and that makes it basically not long-term predictable. But these are exactly these kind of situations that I think will be challenging us more and more in the future, and that we need to learn how to manage them. And what I'm saying here is that planning and optimization is not working well for these kind of complex systems with short-term predictability and large variability. Instead, flexible adaptation based on local interaction is superior if we do it the right way. And the right way means that you shouldn't just think of your own situation, but also consider the impact of your decisions on the environment, on the neighbors. And if enough people do that, or enough companies do that, that will create a better outcome. Now you could say, okay, there will be always many companies and individuals who don't do that. The reputation mechanism would basically create something like a clustering. Like friendly people would tend to interact with friendly people. Same thing with other regarding companies. Environmental friendly companies would tend to interact with environmental friendly companies, and so on. And that principle would basically drive the level of cooperation to a higher level.
Yes, A cynical comment would be communism failed, but probably this is not the idea you have.
No, it's good that you're bringing this up,
It failed, but
but
for the wrong reasons.
in fact, if you want to put a label to this, then this is communism,
Sure, yeah.
and this is capitalism, and what this is, we'll have to see.
No, but my main point is, once you draw upon common pool resources, the model you have might work as Ostrom's work was okay with a small village and Norwegian fishermen. But the very moment you move to larger social systems, you need control, sanctions, and institutions. And I wonder why you entirely sort of rely upon the goodwill of people instead of asking the question, if that fails and if they defect, we definitely need a larger social systems, controls, and all this apparatus Ostrom has suggested.
Well, I do propose an institution here that I hope will have to be shown will be effective to a certain extent. It will not be able to replace police and courts entirely. And this institution is a reputation mechanism, yeah? And in principle, reputation mechanisms, as I am proposing them, is transferring the success principle of a village to the global village, you could say.
There is no example that this is going to work.
Well, we can, however, see this, these reputation systems that we're having are putting some pressure on sellers to come up with better offers. For example, there's a consumption or consumer platform that Germany has established some time ago, and people can complain about products if they think they're being tricked, and that has made many companies change their products. So there seems to be a driving force towards the better through such kind of simple information platforms.
And one point I have to support you, eBay is a global reputation system. And reputation systems, the interesting point is that you need at least some actors or certain proportion of actors which have other regarding preferences.
Yes.
And this is an important thing, and it was supported by our empirical analysis of a lot of eBay transactions. So in this case, Homo economicus would lead to a collapse of these large markets. There are a lot of questions you talk about, but
but also these kind of studies show that if you're tricking your customers, you will, after a short time, disappear from the market. And some sellers actually learn that they have to be considering the desires of their customers if they want to survive for a longer time.
Yeah. And another question is, I mean, it seems to be a bit over-optimistic with the bottom-up model. I mean, it's a real Swiss model. And,
but
there are a lot of regulations where you have, as Jürgen also said, where it is recommended to have it top-down. For example, again, traffic rules. I mean, the rule to drive on the right side of the street, if this is a local bottom-up approach, I mean, we would have a disaster in the streets. So we have a general rule for whole country or whole Europe, and this is a top-down approach. Same sometimes with environmental regulations. I think that the most severe problem now is the failure of the European cap-and-trade system, which is a top-down approach, regulation, but it broke down because certain interests interfered with this system. And I think if such a system would function, it would be much superior than, say, your interesting idea of competition between cities.
Yeah, but it doesn't function.
Why should cities
That's
compete?
my point.
Really, why should they compete? Which interests have cities like Shanghai or to compete with Zürich or Los Angeles? I mean, the cities are the people in the cities, and they have costs to bear.
Okay. There is an interesting experiment that I didn't show that Michael Mace has carried out with me, which is about a competition game where your chances to win are proportional to your investments. And it turns out that if you have different institutional settings compete with each other, the investment in one group is actually driving up the investment in the other group. So competition actually raises the level of commitment. That's extremely interesting and unexpected.
Yeah, but if they profit in some or the other, but
No, they don't. That's the point. In that experiment, actually, if everybody is raising the level of investment, their chances to win are not increasing. But still, they're raising the level of investment. That is very interesting. So there is a social mechanism that basically says that competition can be used for certain kinds of things.
I think the major problem is that you did not specify conditions under which your model holds. And what I would do is I would look at specific empirical cases. For example, there's a lot of empirical research. For example, Ericsson, order without law. I think there your model perfectly fits. So this is a situation where you have trespassing cattle, and the actors, they don't even know the law. And they usually do not go to attorneys and so on. And there it perfectly fits. But look at other cases, like the making of the US Constitution, or the making of the Grundgesetz. How could you manage this from the bottom up? Or maybe maybe you were in the GDR and have seen the huge pollution shortly after unification. I mean, here laws were made, and I really can't see how you could achieve what the laws have achieved by spontaneous behavior. And
no, I think actually that there is something like an evolutionary process here.
Let me finish. Let you finish too. And the other example is Ostrom. You mentioned that. I mean, she specified cases where a solution of the common two-prong happened and where it did not. You know, and what happened, if it worked, then these people created institutions. And then, given the institutions, they enforced the behavior of the actors. So here, top-down management really worked. So again, what I would suggest is take empirical cases and then specify the conditions under which your model holds and does not hold.
I'm not arguing against institutions, and certainly there are circumstances where top-down works well. Yeah? So it can shortcut information flows, for example. And in any setting where you have a relatively stable condition and you can plan, or it's not an NP-hard optimization problem and you can optimize in real time, then top-down is a good approach. But we have also seen that, but in many circumstances it doesn't work, and maybe it doesn't work anymore. We have seen that, for example, very recently, where the United States was very close to bankruptcy, yeah? And people are now discussing whether there needs to be a systemic change here. So somehow there seems to be a problem of involving different political points of view, and what is the result is that there is a clash of different interests that kind of makes it impossible to find an agreement. And here the Swiss system, I think, is interesting because it has this participatory and consensual character that's trying to take on board different perspectives and find some solution that everybody can live with, and not just impose a majority decision. And that seems to be more long-term sustainable. Switzerland, I think, is a very good example for the success of a bottom-up ruled system. And in fact, it's one of the few industrialized countries that doesn't have this huge debt level, for example. and where people have a high level of satisfaction with their country and politics and the economic situation and so on. So that's an empirical example that I think is worth considering, such kind of approaches.
Thank you. I find your presentation very provoking.
Yeah, that was the idea.
And
no, in fact.
and I'd like to divide it into the first and the second
Right,
part.
okay.
And I could follow very well your first part, and I find your simulation very convincing. And I also agree, I would not disagree with the assumptions that you made for the simulation, for the development of this Homo Socialis.
Okay.
So I like this a lot, and I see this as a very optimistic development. However, in the second part, I'm not as optimistic as you are.
Okay.
Because I think that there is it's a mismatch between the speed or the dynamics of the development of Homo Socialis. As you said, it's an evolutionary process.
Yes.
It takes generations and hundreds of generations and so on before you have a stable situation where everybody is cooperative and friendly and so on. You also showed the development, and then you put a lot of hope into the development of new technologies, and this development is extremely fast. So, but you can use technologies for being friendly or being unfriendly, which means that if this development goes very fast, but the evolution of Homo Socialis does not reach a certain threshold, it might happen that the Homo economicus or egoisticus or whatever takes over the technology, and we have no chance as a system, as a human system, to reach the situation where this could be used for friendly purposes.
I agree that this could be an intermediate stage, in fact, but I don't think that will be kind of the final outcome of this evolutionary process. So basically, I do think there is probably a natural development of certain kinds of social institutions. There are also some options, different ways in what order they could happen and what specific form they could have. And that's why we have different kinds of cultures. And certainly this top-down organization can be found basically in every country, but the question is, what would be the next step of this evolution? And I do think that institutions like reputation systems might enable us to do things in a more decentralized way. Now, the critical point is, given the situation we're in, these are measurements of human beings as we have them today. The majority of people have more or less pro-social preferences, some more, some less. And so it's critical whether these pro-social people end up behaving selfishly because our current institutions are kind of driving them to behave this way, or whether we allow them to behave in a social way and maybe create even additional incentives to make those self-oriented decision makers behave socially because they could create a higher profit in the end. So this is kind of the crucial question. Now, why do I believe that in the end this system that we're kind of painting, where a few people or institutions are controlling everything in a top-down way, assume NSA, for example, with all the information they have and all the power, why wouldn't that work forever? Because we have not just an exponential evolution of computational power, but we have an even faster evolution of complexity of the system. That increase is combinatorial as compared to exponential. And that means one day the complexity of these systems cannot be managed anymore with all the computer power that we have, because the complexity is just too
But
big.
is the complexity a one-dimensional thing? I mean,
What?
something. You treat complexity as a one-dimensional thing, but some things like multinational companies are getting less complex because there are just a few big ones. Other things like the internet is getting more complex, so you cannot just reason about complexity as if it were a simple thing.
No, but what we certainly do is that we're connecting systems more and more. Yeah, that is, the internet has done that, and you've argued that internet's complexity is increasing. So that trend will continue and will make decisions more and more interdependent, and therefore make things more complex, less predictable, and so on. So I cannot really prove it, yeah, but my intuition, given the work I've done before, would say that one day it's just too much complexity to be handled in a top-down way. We'll have to find more efficient ways, and the traffic light example has shown that there are more efficient ways, and these are based on decentralized control, a local interaction principles, and that's translated into a societal context means a more participatory approach, and that's why I think that will be eventually the result of that cultural evolutionary process.
Okay, I try to make it quick, so I have a comment and a question. The comment is I'm not entirely convinced that we should be discussing what would be the ideal society into which things should develop. Maybe they will meet 500 years from now, and then we see if you're right. But having said that, just because certain, so to say, subsystems of a society work very efficiently in a particular way, so it was very convincing, the corner in Egypt, but if you've ever driven in Naples, you would have experienced the same thing. It's terribly efficient, very few real accidents, etc. But that in itself is not a proof that all other subsystems and maybe the whole society should or even could be managed, organized that way. My question is about computer power, which you mentioned, then it also came up. You said like 70% of trading was done by computers. Isn't it the same like saying that 100% of long distance travel is done by airplanes?
No, because
Yes. Maybe I'm
no,
not getting your point.
long distance travel could not be done without airplanes. While
That kind of long distance traveling cannot be done without something. So either by airplanes or by trains or by ships or something. So you see, those computers, if I understand correctly, this is my question, perform an algorithm which was somehow given to them. Maybe nobody understands anymore what was the algorithm given originally, etc. But still, it is not somehow their intention, and it's not their decision to trade. Just like airplanes don't make any decisions about my travel. So I don't see that point.
Machine learning algorithms, so they can learn. They're contextually sensitive.
The machine learning algorithm is something that we program into our computers. Machine learning doesn't mean machines learn anything by themselves. They run an algorithm as a result of which we learn something.
No, I'm telling you that actually we're entering a situation where robots, in principle, can build other robots, and they wouldn't necessarily have to be identical, and they wouldn't have to be robots designed by humans. But in principle, you can kind of simulate the principles of evolution, as I've done it here, to show the emergence of the Homo Socialis. That means introduce mutation in selection. And so in this way they would learn and they would evolve into more powerful robots. So if you talk to IT specialists in big companies like Microsoft or Google or whatsoever, those people wouldn't doubt that actually computer power.
Oh, that's their job,
No,
I would say.
But it's even those who don't earn the money of those companies, but kind of following the development in this area, that are getting very much concerned about these developments, because it's pretty clear that anything that can be done in a procedural way, or by data mining, or by learning, will most likely
But
be able to
computers
be.
were generating poetry even 50 years ago, so that in itself perhaps is not it.
No, but at the moment the situation is like this, that humans are more adaptable than computers, and that's why we have to adapt to the software. One day, when computers are more powerful in terms of processing than humans, will potentially be the other way around if we design the systems in such a way. Yeah, so that will change the
Evolution
system.
of Homo Socialis.
We would watch their society.
4 minutes and 3 questions left.
Three.
I just have a brief remark about bottom-up and top-down. If we look at what Liz Ostrom has done together with Vincent Ostrom, then it's the polycentric idea that you must have bottom-up, but only to the level of the polycentric higher level. So in some of what is missing in your thing is that you have to define the polycentric boundaries, where you do need some rules or some limits being set from a higher level, but that is again a bottom down with regard to the level above it. They have done a beautiful story, for example, about the police. Should we have a national police or not? And the answer is, of course, we should not. But we do need certain rules that on a higher level in order to make the local police work. It's a wonderful study.
I'm not arguing against multi-level self-organization. I mean, it's kind of clear that also hierarchies can potentially result from self-organization. Yeah, but
it's a limit to the bottom up. It's the bottom up to the level of the higher. I mean, there must be a compatibility of what the bottom does to the next higher level.
I do think that's very much determined by the level of variability and predictability. You know, how hierarchical or how whatever structured these kinds of systems would be in the ideal case. But one of the arguments I'm making is that by connecting systems more and more, making them more and more interdependent, that creates a complex dynamics that makes the system less predictable and more variable, and that's why the percentage of bottom-up management or governance will have to increase and will increase. That's kind of the point.
Well, I give another answer to the question of Sigi. You seem not to realize that there is already a self-regulating system instead of the traffic lights. Namely, that is the roundabout. And they even had to change a rule, the basic rule that right has priority above left, in order to have the self-regulating system of the roundabout. And so I think in the procedural system, you should not speak about bottom-up, but legislation that is promoting self-regulating and is based on self-regulation. That is one thing. The second thing is that there are a number of indicators in our society that is driving people, politicians, business people, and normal people in a completely wrong way. For example, the national income, so the percentage of growth, and also there is the exponential rule valid. So if China has a growth of 7%, it means that in 10 years its national income is double. And after again 10 years it is quadruple. So the important thing is that we should have incentives also at the macro level that are really incorporating the fact that welfare is not based on the amount of production, but reducing scarcity. So in fact we should have, apart from the national income, let's say the percentage of the national income that we can produce without increasing scarcity of national resources. And that has been computed. That is about half of the national income that we are producing at this moment worldwide. And so the basic thing is then, if you want to have a competition, that we have both integers, and that then, let's say, the difference between the two is reduced as maximal as possible at the local level. Then you have again a self-regulating system that is oriented towards sustainability.
So I agree with you that one-dimensional performance measures like GDP per capita is not a good orientation for good policies, and there are many more important things that happen, like protecting environment, increasing social well-being, and so on. And in fact, I have other slides which are addressing these kinds of things. However, coming back again to this legislatory thing, Andreas was also suggesting this. What if we wouldn't have this rule to drive on the right-hand side? We know pedestrians do have also a preferred walking side, and there are models to explain this as the outcome of the evolution of a social convention. And so in principle these things can happen by self-organization. In fact, when you study traffic in Egypt, you will see that on a 3-lane road, when there is the rush hour, this will turn into a 5-lane road. You know, although it's marked in a different way and legislation has foreseen it to be used in a different way, but people just use it such that the capacity of the system goes up without compromising.
Don't give examples of Egypt, Egypt as the desirable system.
The point really is, how would you have to design systems so self-regulation would work? Yeah, I agree that if you design an intersection the wrong way, then it will create a lot of mess. But I've shown you an intersection design where it worked well. So the question is, what design principles would allow self-regulation to work? And I think that is a question that is really worth pursuing. That is a research program that I'm very much interested in. And I'm not saying, you know, replace everything by self-regulation. We certainly have to learn how to do it in each single system, and there might be systems where it will never work, but it's worth thinking about this, I believe. And it's good to have these kind of solutions ready someday, and hopefully soon.
Very last question. Two remarks. I think the first is, I think this is a very old and it's a controversy that's settled, which you're revisiting. You know, this is the controversy of price systems, which goes back to Hayek and Lange, and the argument was that market systems are supposed to match demand and supply. That's an informational problem. Applied to it as well, and Hayek basically came up with a very, you know, big, very simple argument that, you know, decentralized systems dominate what a planet can do for a variety of reasons. And I think that argument, as far as I'm concerned, I think economists have taken on board. The experience of communism has worked. So I think that that's not a controversial argument, that, you know, in principle decentralized systems can dominate centralized systems. It's a theoretical argument, it's been made, it's been empirically shown. What you're saying is that there are computational reasons why, in fact, why the centralized system may not work. But that adds to that debate, and I just thought you might want to keep in mind this is a very famous debate from the 50s, and Hayek actually won Nobel Prize for that paper, mainly. The other question I thought, most of your talk was devoted to essentially bottom-up or decentralized systems and how they could exploit sociality. And my sense is that that's actually a very substantive point, and it actually, I think you were provocative, and maybe you meant to be provocative, and it's good, but it seems to me that your argument, given all the discussion, is suggesting that the margin between top-down and bottom-up has changed because we have technologies like reputation systems, like eBay, and just, like Wikipedia. These are all technology-enabled systems, which were just not feasible 30 years ago, let's face it. And they are feasible now, so the margin between these different formal top-down institutions and decentralized systems has changed, and you're making a case that should be accommodated and there should be more of that. And I would think that most of us would probably take that as a reasonable position. I think we all take it, we're enjoying that, I would say. But I don't know if that's what you really meant to say and the rest was provocation, or
Well, one of the points that I wanted to make is to say self-organization, if you do it in the classical way, will not always lead to the desirable outcome. Yeah, like the crowd disasters, the traffic jam, the financial meltdown, and so on. And what I'm also saying is, however, there are different ways of decentralized self-organization that would make it happen. So you would have a desirable outcome, and that requires suitable institutional settings. And so it's worth thinking about new institutions using information systems of today that would kind of improve the performance of those self-organizing systems. And I think that this is important. And in particular, if you say, okay, markets match supply and demand, yes, but not in detail. Yeah, so we have the issue that in African countries, for example, some people don't have enough to eat, while in other countries we have an obesity problem. So we don't have a detailed matching. And I think that these platforms that we're now having allow a much more detailed matching. For example, if you're collecting particular antiquities, for example, before it was very difficult to find them. Now with eBay and so on, you can really have a one-to-one matching. And so that has really new potentials that this is opening up. And that's basically the point I'm trying to make. So how can we improve market mechanisms with these information systems to allow these systems to be more effective?